just a couple seconds. Harrison, are you in on the thing? I'm not looking at my Zoom.
I am. Hello. Good to see you.
Wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. I'll definitely introduce you.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I've got the link. I'm going to send that out to everyone. How was that card on Saturday, everyone?
I have a disagreement with you. Oh. to start with a disagreement.
We're already starting with the controversy. I love it.
I saw that you put that it was one of the best cards. I think it was exciting and strange, but not a good card. In that I don't think there was actually a single good fight. It was just exciting moments. And then there was also horrific stuff that happened along the way.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So Chris Weidman's leg being destroyed was not good. The crowd was exciting to see people back, but it was also very gross to see what fans chose to boo at, when fans chose to boo and who they were booing. So as much as it was like wonderful and exciting and thrilling, I thought it was like it's a perfect encapsulation of some of the excitement of MMA and some of the horrors of MMA. So I can't
because Florida.
Yeah.
We talked about this.
Yeah.
Because Florida.
Yeah, Tanisha and I talked about it.
No. Can Tanisha, as I'm getting this done, can you give me your thoughts on 261?
Agreed. I mean, it was the fans really brought an element back. The prelims were great too. So the whole kind of build up from the first punch, I forget what those ladies' names were, but damn,
that was one of the best fights.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like that was dope. So it set a tone. And so I'm wondering how much extra hype can be attributed to the fans and that, just that event and that just goosebump appeal, that kind of feeling of it. But agreed. I mean, it was a fast card because there was just, leg snappage and knockouts and head kicks and all those things. But I thought it was exciting. But yeah, maybe not necessarily from like grading a fight performance, but it was one of those. It was good branding for them. It was. Yeah. They produced a lot of Sports Center top 10 highlights. So from a branding perspective, and I was watching with a layman, a casual who like never really understands. So she was like, I'm fucking hooked. So it worked for that. But maybe so that, they get an A for that and appeal in marketing and producing, Sports Center top 10. But from, someone who, this is the show to overthink MMA, right? for probably us, it maybe not, like Kyle said, was, athletically the best performance.
I thought you were talking, you go.
Overthinking MMA so much as actually analyzing it and bringing the things to bear that need to be brought to bear. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I agree with a lot of what you said. But honestly, the prelim fights were.
That's what I'm saying. That was the best shit.
Those were back and forth. That was actually saw momentum.
Those were fights.
The main card was just every fight was one-sided.
100%. The prelims were fighting. The rest was just like freak accident and ass handings.
And even though I was caught up in the excitement of it, it was so hard to see Zhang Wei Li getting booed while talking after being knocked out. Like if we want to see the kind of the xenophobia and racism that is built into MMA, that's the danger of it. I think that was the horrible moment of the night.
In Florida, that's why.
We have to contend to.
Masvidal walking in with a free Alexis Villa shirt. I don't know if you guys saw that, but that dude was convicted of torture and murder. He's in jail for a reason.
Don't let things like that get in the way. I mean, he's probably a good homie, like that's not
like, I think I wrote his visa letter to stay in the country at one point. Like, I'm feeling a lot of guilt for that one.
I didn't catch that at all. I mean, he took his shirt off pretty fast and threw it in the crowd, so I didn't even see what was on it.
I think he was wearing it in the back, and yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think that you're right. Talking about like that fight, and I really want to talk about this just a little bit more because it was hard to also watch people enjoying a mass capacity fight with no mask when I have to just even to go to the grocery store, even to do anything. And, my daughter can't do that. So for me, it was also this idea of I'm watching something that doesn't exist in my world. So it's kind of like I am not in this club and kind of thing. But
Because you import common sense.
Well, I guess, yes. Common sense, CDC guidelines, you know, those things. But I think that I have to say, watching Usman get that KO when no one expected it, you know, like those kind of things that you just and then the head kick from Rose, so that she and Julie, you know this about, there's not been a woman in the UFC to recapture a title. So I have to say, it had everything sports. So we're never going to have a perfect event, but I'm glad I watched.
Oh, me too.
So,
You know what? It delivered the drama that they wanted and they needed, and they were pitching. And you know, I mean, knockouts are exciting. Like controversy is exciting. Super spreader events, not a thing, not an exciting thing to me. Kind of a thing where I'm watching, and
yeah,
well, we'll go into the details of how I watched it. So.
yeah. I love it. Well, let's dive into our panel because you know, I'm sure we'll come back to this. You know, I think you mentioned Chris Weidman. I think when we talk about pain and combat sports, and so if actually, could we have Kyle and Jordan? I'm going to introduce you guys at the end, but can we have our team of you know, my co-professors, co-chairs of these panels? Tanisa, can you introduce yourself, and then Julie?
Struggled to find my mouse cursor for a second. Hi, Dr. Tanisha Singleton, PhDs in media psychology. I specialized in fandom and digital disruption in sports, teach community psychology classes, consultant, creative strategist, tech integration, fan engagement, all those things. Really interested also in obviously like the intersection of like sports, society, politics, culture, storytelling, all of those things, which is a cool announcement Kyle and I are going to make. We got accepted into co-authoring an article about the UFC's brand identity during COVID, and performed some content analysis on their 3 major commercials that they produced last summer, beginning with Trump's announcement that opened one of the fight nights, or that closed one of the fight nights in Florida. I forget, that was like maybe May. And then the original Fight Island commercial when it was still Usman versus Burns before he got pulled for the injury or COVID, whatever it was. And then the last commercial was that awesome one that he deleted on his own social media, the one where Dana basically said all news and journalists are, you know, just incorrect and haters and they're the villains and all of that stuff. So that article hopefully is going to be coming out soon, but it's got accepted in the Journal of Emerging Sports Studies.
Congratulations.
Kyle did everything. He eliminated the cuss words that I put in the article. He's the scholarly one. I was like, this is bullshit. And then he said, in conclusion, we determined that discourse, blah, blah, blah. Like that was all him.
I love it. And then when did you put the proposal in? Because as part of the academia field, how long did it take to get this?
What did we do? March?
Yeah, this journal actually moved pretty fast. And so to give some backstage of academia, we won't get too depth in this.
Please don't.
We did submit it to one journal first, and it got rejected. So and they actually took longer to respond. And then we did revisions. The article did get a lot better. So some of the critiques that the first journal had, halfway fair. This one went pretty fast, and it got accepted the first time around, which almost never happens. So I think getting rejected the first time was the equivalent of getting all that advice that we did. So I'd say journal. It seems like a really cool journal though. So I'd say people should check it out, not just our stuff, but anything that they're doing.
Julie, tell us about what's going on with you.
Oh, well, my name is Julie Kedzie. I'm a former professional fighter. I fought in events like Elite XC, Bodog, the UFC, Strikeforce. I've been retired from fighting since 2013. And I went back to school to get my degree in creative nonfiction from the University of Iowa. I have also been a broadcaster and analyst for Invicta FC since 2012, since Invicta FC 1. And I'm very proud to announce that there will be an event coming up May 21st with Invicta. And yeah, we've signed a big deal. I didn't sign it. Shannon Knapp has signed on. And it's going to be a great deal, or a great deal. And it's going to be great for the athletes to be on television again in a umbrella kind of their own. I think that you're going to see some real shining there from some incredible athletes. I also am pleased to announce that I have something published finally, or an upcoming thing finally published. I am very shy about publishing, but Chris Reaney, The Fine Art of Violence.
Yes.
If I got that title wrong, I'm going to kick myself after this. But The Fine Art of Violence, I have an essay in his upcoming book, volume 2, I should say, The Fine Art of Violence. And that, I don't remember when it drops, but my essay is actually about Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk and that fight. And it's real artsy, the essay. So what I've got going on right now. Yeah.
I love it. So Kyle, actually, because I want to do it justice, can you give your background? Because I don't want to mess it up, I'll be honest. But I have
Okay. I always hate giving my background. So the short version, I'm a professor of sociology at SUNY Brockport. I write and research in the areas of how people build meaning around physical practice. So how people build communities around physical activities. In particular, my dissertation and a number of articles that came out of it are based on mixed martial arts. And then I also, the other area of research is on sports and politics. So I've focused mostly on the NBA and kind of the way the NBA has created a particular cultural space where players are empowered to speak about certain political ideas or engage in certain types of social justice activities, but also the limitations of being a professional athlete and engaging in politics. And then, like Tanisha said, taking that interest in sports and politics, we've looked at the UFC and their branding during COVID. Those are my 2 areas of expertise. So it's a kind of the brief summary.
And his third area is he's writing a memoir about his fascination with Chris Webber and and how the Denver Nuggets are supposedly the new Sacramento Kings. I don't know what that means, but he's telling people.
It's not true, but I, if there were a chance to bring it up in this podcast, I will talk about the Sacramento Kings and Denver Nuggets if you need that. But I don't think that's necessary.
All right. And then we have, before I get to Jordan, Harrison, will you give just a shout out? You are you're going to be a junior.
Yes, I'm a junior right now. Going to be a senior next year here at American. And yeah, just a big MMA fan, and very happy that Professor Kidder invited me to be here.
No, love to have your thoughts on this roundtable. All right. And Jordan, I am so thankful you are here. You are an athletic trainer at American University, and specifically wrestling. Do you also cover any other sports?
Yeah, I cover the wrestling team, and then I also cover men's track and field cross country. And in the last year, just with kind of extra COVID stuff, I've also taken on men's soccer for a little while. I did volleyball, and then I'm doing men's, women's swimming as well. So I've been all over this year, but the majority of my coverage has all been with wrestling. Yes.
Got it. Oh, no. And I'd love to also hear how COVID, dealing with that, has been in athletics at the university level. You went to University of Nebraska and graduated in 2015.
Yep.
And then you earned your bachelor's degree in athletic training. And then you went on to South Dakota State University, where you spent 2 years as a graduate assistant, where you earned your master's in sport and recreation studies. Mm-hmm. And then while you were there, I thought this was interesting. You had first responder duty and management of pathogens, which how good is that to have on now?
Yeah. So it's a fancy way of, saying like cleaning up blood and stuff, and stopping bleeding during matches and during practices and stuff. So I mean, that was a everyday thing. I worked with the wrestling team from the time I got there. I worked with Coach Chris Bono and also assistant coach John Reeder. And then I was lucky enough to get a really cool experience to help Coach Reeder out when he was wrestling at the Olympic trials in Iowa City for the Rio Olympics. That was just really cool to be on the floor for all that and help him kind of get to that level and help him train. But yeah. It's been to a lot of wrestling practices.
I love that you have it throughout every level of sport. So thank you. And, why have I brought you all here? Why, have we, my crew of Ready and Fighting people, why have we come together today? And it's because of pain. And we want to discuss it in not the typical manner. Yes, pain in athletics, it's needed, right? That's when you have it, it means that your muscles have had micro tears and you're building strength when it repairs. That's good pain. But then we have further on damage. We have, tendinitis, we have inflammation, we get stress fractures, we get cartilage. And that goes further into, we have injuries, especially in combat sports, in competition and training. And these could also not only be those kinds of injuries, they could be head, strikes and other kinds of contusions. And, as we're going to talk to you, and I'm actually going to give this to Kyle, there are other things that happen with pain. It's also a way of socialization in the gym community. That connects them as warriors. We also see that it could possibly be something, in my research, it was fascinating to learn that because pain also has endorphins, which help alleviate it, there can be addiction and other aspects to it that come to play. And also there's something about it that it makes you feel yourself and in your body. So I want to explore all of these things, how it's evolved, really deep dive into being hurt. So Kyle, I really want to do my class. We read your article, and I wrote it down here, and I have it actually. It hurts, so it is real. Sensing the seduction of martial arts. And we had a huge discussion in my class that I mentioned, where we went everywhere with this about how, yes, this is something that happens in athletics. And no one really talks about it, that sometimes you are attracted to the pain and like the pain. And you did this study in this paper, and you've also just had another paper published, communicating with George, is it Batil?
Bataille.
Bataille in mixed martial arts. So give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so there's a lot. I guess an easy way to start, or maybe a way that makes sense, and then we could decide where the conversation goes, is thinking about what I'm trying to do in that first paper is think about the different roles that pain can play in the gym. And I'd say there's even more roles beyond the 3 that I outline in the gym. So outside of what I look at in the paper, we could think about what you were bringing up in the very beginning, and Jordan would be an expert here, thinking about pain management, right? Pain is always involved in training as an athlete, especially when you're training in something like wrestling, something like boxing, any sort of combat sport. So there's the functional way of where there's a lot of obsession with how do I manage this thing, because you want to push yourself as hard as physically possible. The more you train, right, the harder you train, that seems better, but you're also damaging your body. So how do you deal with that? How do you make sure that the swelling and the inflammation is not too much? How do you make sure that you can train the next day? How do you find that balance between going hard enough but not going too hard? So there's that functional relationship to pain. And then and along with that it would be interesting to think about when is pain telling you that you're actually at risk of doing more serious damage, right? Is it superficial pain or is it injury? I don't talk about that in the paper. I think that stuff's fascinating, but not as much my focus. There's also the way that pain relates to masculinity. And there's a lot of great research in sociology about kind of this masculine practice of turning your body into a weapon, right? And this goes beyond just what male bodies do, right? But it's just something we associate with masculinity. So obviously, as Julie can tell us through her own expertise, right? There's a way that you were transforming your body into a weapon. That's still something kind of functional, right? How do you improve your body and make it the best pain producing machine, and also a body that can withstand pain? So when you get kicked in the thigh, you don't just say ouch and like stop. And it's always fascinating. I think it's so interesting how when you're training, you can withstand a lot of pain, but then you can be at home and you get up in the middle of the night and you just bump into a chair and it hurts a lot out like outside of the context. But turning your body into something that can withstand pain. That's another role that pain plays that we could talk about, but I don't talk about that in my paper either. The things that interest me are, like you were bringing up in the introduction, is what are the ways that we actually seek out pain, and that's important to our enjoyment of the gym, right? And whether it's a very personal enjoyment or whether it serves a role in creating community. So what I argue in the paper is that there's 3 roles that pain can play. And again, we can go into depth on any of these. The first is the idea that pain helps establish to participants that what they're doing is a real activity, right? Because this thing hurts, therefore it's different than one of those silly martial arts that's not actually real. That it means something more than playing tennis, right? Like there's something serious going on here, and that can be used. It's hurt, so it's real can be something we say to ourselves when we're training, as we're trying to find motivation. It could be something we say to other people, right? I remember when I first started training and I was walking over to a friend's house after I trained, and he was kind of making fun of me and being like, "Oh, you're starting to do that like karate or something like that." And then I had a bunch of bruises on my arm and on my body, and like that was evidence that it was more than just like this silly thing. That convinced him that it was something more serious. So we convince ourselves that, we convince other people that it's real. And there's also community engagement where we like to show, hey, if you're in a gym and you bring up how you got injured, without fail, it starts this ripple effect where everyone in the gym starts to talk about injuries, right? Like everyone points to a part of their body that's been hurt. Or when you're talking about how you hurt your knee or you hurt your ankle when you were grappling, other people actually like grab their own ankle or knee. So there's a way that everyone feels that this practice is real because of the pain. So that's the first role. The second role that I talk about in the paper is the idea of that pain is a way that we can discover the self. And this is true of, I think, every sport to a degree, right? If you talk to people who run, and really push themselves, people who cycle, people who swim, and you're testing your endurance, there's a way that you find yourself. But especially in training in something where pain is so inherent to the practice, there's a way that we discover our bodies and that we feel more alive because of the pain. It actually forces you to retreat inwards. And I know a lot of sports psychologists like to talk about flow. That's that moment where you're feeling in control, you're feeling creative, you feel mastery, and you actually lose awareness of the self, right? You're more aware of everything going on around you, which is a wonderful transformative experience. What I'm exploring in the paper is how that moment when you actually get hurt and it forces you to contract inwards, that can actually be desirable too. And again, we could talk about all the reasons for that. Here, it's really important that this is a temporary pain. And again, we could think about what Jordan does also. If it's chronic pain, it can have that same effect, but it's no longer desirable, right? If your knee is always hurting you because of injury, it does take you away from the surrounding world. It forces you to retreat inward, but you can't control it and you hate it. But if it's this temporary thing that you find in the MMA gym, and it's that throbbing of your leg when you get kicked, or even the next day you're still feeling that, it actually brings you back into the gym, and it does something different where it can be desirable. So there's amazing work on chronic pain, but I just haven't seen as much about the joys of temporary pain. And I should bring up, with the exception, Stacy Newmar is this amazing professor at University of Buffalo. She wrote a book called Playing on the Edge, which is about S&M culture. There's a lot of relationship between the way she studies pain and S&M culture versus what I found in the MMA gym, which I would often bring up when I was doing research and I'd be training with people, and they wouldn't always like that I was comparing what we were doing to S&M. So it would always start funny conversations when I bring that up. And then the third thing about pain is I'm interested in the way it actually creates community. And one of the arguments I make is the way that pain can help create community is it places people in a state of vulnerability, and you know who is causing that state of vulnerability, right? You're experiencing someone else hurt you and trap you in a position where you're on your back and you literally can't get up, and maybe they're punching you, maybe they're trying to choke you, but you can't escape. That's a true vulnerability that happens. You're encountering the other person inflicting pain on you, or vice versa, where you're the one inflicting pain on another person and you can see the effect you're having on them. And so what I'm interested in is how that transgression, going beyond the ordinary activities, going beyond the ordinary encounters we have between two bodies in society, can actually create a space where people feel connected to each other. Now, that can be a good or bad thing depending on the gym culture that develops around the painful experience, the stories that get told around it. But those are the three roles that I'm really interested that pain plays in the gym. And again, I'm happy to talk about any of those, but I don't want to take up the whole hour and 15 just in the introduction.
No, that's really actually. Can I pivot to Jordan? Because I think that what you're bringing up too is that there is good pain and there is bad pain. And so, Jordan, you know, I think I'm a statistic girl. I looked up that 54% of student athletes have been injured. Well, this is at your own risk.com. So it's, you know, an agency that's looking at, you know, students' injuries in athletics. But then I also looked up just MMA in general in a study. I think it was in sport and science and sports. And they say that 53.6% athletes suffered injury in the last 12 months of when they were doing this. I think this was, they were looking at studies from the mid 2000s to like 2015. Can you go into how much you look at good pain versus bad pain and what you do in your job?
Yeah. So the at your own risk, I think that website typically is across all NCAA sanctioned sports. So there's 90 of them, I believe. Wrestling is pretty much the only combat sport that NCAA does sponsor. So I guess when I'm looking at good pain versus bad pain, temporary versus serious pain, that's one of the first things that I do when I'm taking like a history, when I'm doing an evaluation of someone coming in to see me for an injury. And that history kind of changes when I'm working with a wrestler, because generally the thought process with wrestlers when they come in with pain is this going to get worse if I keep practicing? And if the answer is no, I'm not going to see him again for usually most treatments or anything like that. Just gonna be like, I'm good to go. So I'm not gonna mess up anything. I'm not gonna miss a match. So whatever. So generally I kind of ask my typical pain questions. You know, does it hurt when you're at rest? Does it hurt at night? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with serious pain? And then how much does it affect your practicing, lifting, running, etc. And so I guess when I move into the actual eval, if I notice something myself that's, you know, maybe there's a ligament or a special test that I do on your knee where I can kind of determine that there is an actual injury, a lot of times I will have to tell the person, like, you're not going to be able to practice, and it generally comes with a little bit of resistance. And then I need to always have an answer of why you shouldn't be practicing. And then even then, a lot of times I will catch them doing something on their own outside of practice time that, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. You know, if you want to have a longer season, if you want to get to March, let's not focus on this next week. Let's focus on the next 3 months type of thing. But I would say with athletics, just from my standpoint, there is a really good amount of pain, and a pain tolerance is just a thing that athletes have to have, and they generally get that shaped based off of what sport they're playing. Yeah. You know, it makes my job easy to work with athletes that are willing to have an accepted amount of pain, that I don't have to always be holding them out of things or things like this. And it's not exclusive to all wrestlers this way, because there's some wrestlers that every little ache and pain is the end of the world, and I better sit out of practice, or I better not wrestle this weekend because I don't know. And you know, it helps when they don't have that situation going on in their head. But when I can kind of keep them managed and keep their pain down and keep them on the mat, that's basically, like, they have to have some expected amount of pain is what I would call it. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. Julie, I see you nodding like you've experienced this. Can you tell us what it's like when you're going between this feels good, I'm feeling like a warrior, to I gotta slow down?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, when I think about wrestlers, the first thing that comes to mind is that kind of, it's almost, you don't succeed in wrestling unless you've been bloodied up, you have cauliflower. I mean, you just have to go through these kinds of trials, and you're coached to not stop ever, right? You know, you keep going till you get the pin, till you never stop. And so pain is, I think, in some ways, from my experience, I mean, I was not a great wrestler, and in my MMA career, I went to wrestling gyms in high school. Boys just beat the crap out of me, and I was a grown lady, so that was, a different kind of pain, maybe humiliating pain, but also what it is kind of a high to work through that, because there's a lot of associations with getting that stamp of approval that you're moving through it. And it's funny, while Jordan was talking, I was thinking, and I'm dating myself here, but I was thinking about Carrie Strug in the Olympics, and that just iconic moment of, I hope I'm getting the right Olympian, but I think I am, of completing the vault and landing on the broken ankle, sticking it on the broken ankle, and then just having to be carried off, and just what that did to our psyche, like, to see somebody go through that for their sport. I mean, that could have, I don't know enough about the anatomy of the ankle, but I would imagine if she landed hard enough, that would have gone up to her knees and her hips and done all sorts of damage to the rest of her body. But the fact that she chose to do it and did it perfectly. And I think in wrestling, and in a lot of combat sports, you're not supposed to quit. Quitting is the worst thing ever. And so, and the easiest excuse to quit is it hurts, right? It's always kind of the question of, are you injured or are you hurt? Injured, you stop. Hurt, you're not supposed to stop. And I think that gets in combat sports. That's a really big lesson that you learn early on if you want to succeed. So I guess that's where my nodding is coming from.
No, and please, everyone, this is a roundtable, so join in, because I guess when you think about, like, Jordan, Carrie Strug, right? That was her name. Would that be acceptable in the NCAA to put a person who had broken her ankle? I mean, would you do that now? Would that be acceptable, or that's a moment, that's the Olympics, she's got the country, going with her? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously that's a very iconic situation, and it's something I think that gets played anytime that the gymnastics comes on, anytime on TV. But I think in the sense of where they were and what they needed to do to win the gold medal, I think that even if she would have been told you're not doing it, she would have probably ran out there and done it herself. But I would definitely, in the situation like that, I think I would have to do the best I can to get them through it. Obviously, it's something that I leave on the athlete as well. I would never force an athlete into something that they feel uncomfortable doing. But if they were like, "What can you do for me? If we can throw some tape on and I can get through this, like, let's do it." I've had athletes who have gotten more like torn ACLs or anything like that kind of late in the season, and they know, and they kind of sit down and have a conversation with me, and it generally leads to, well, let's manage the pain, let's do rehab every day, let's keep you on the mat and keep you in the best shape we can possibly do to get you through the end of the year. And it's had mixed results. I mean, I've had an athlete tear their ACL at NCAAs, and they went ahead and finished out their career and wrestled their last 2 matches and ended up being an All-American. But, it's kind of on the athlete. And I think that it's also a little bit situational. So
it's on the athlete. Tanisha, I'm bringing you in here because we've had this talk about when to throw in the towel. This is like in competition. And there's a lot of kind of speculate or talk that trainers don't do it enough, or the cornermen don't do it enough, because it is, you want to die on your sword. But if you see someone, and this is what I think must be so hard, what if that person continues to go and they end up doing very bad damage? How much do you have to say no? So Tanisha, I know you have questions.
too. Podcast plug. No, it's interesting because what Jordan was just saying, I think it's very true in terms of the situational piece and it being on the athlete. Because I think especially when we get to like larger professional levels where you've been doing this for such amount of time, you know your body. You know when, okay, this will be sore for a while, but I could hang, or nah, this feels different. Like this is wrong. Like, you know your body, right? So I think, yeah, there has to be some discretion in knowing that, all right, I trust my athlete too, like as their coach or trainer, someone in their corner. It's like, okay, I trust you to know your body. You know when something feels right and wrong and what could be more long-term as opposed to just, kind of situational pain or bumps and bruises. So it's interesting though, because we saw this on Saturday. Like, what was the opening fight on the main card? The one with Anthony Smith, when dude in between rounds got the leg kick. Yeah, it was the first fight, because then there was like 2 brutal leg things in a row.
Yeah.
What's his name? Crute?
House?
Kraut, yeah. With him, right? So in between, like, he wanted to keep going. And then the doctor stopped it and he was like, fuck, because he knew. It seemed like, because once a couple of minutes kept going by and, when Buffer announced Anthony's winner, and then it was like, shit, man, like you could see that dead leg is starting to come back a little bit. He's like, man, if I only had like another minute or two, I probably, would have a better shot at convincing the doc that I'm straight. But so it's hard. It's hard because like he knew he wanted to keep going, felt like he could, but it was, wasn't up to him. It was, which is, leads into like, okay, when does someone throw in the towel? When do you allow that kind of stuff? Like, what's your boy? Wilder was pissed that his corner finally did it,
He fired him after.
Yeah, it did. He's no job. Well, I'm sure he probably has a job by now. But yeah, that's what I'm saying, because it goes into some of the like larger social and community things that Kyle was talking about. He's like, no, if you throw in the towel, that makes me look soft. Now my boys are going to think I'm, you know what I mean? So that there's community, positive and negative, it just depends on the group. And I'm sure there's a lot of other like gender-based, role-based, cultural, social-based things. It's like, no, men, I can't quit, like die on your sword, all of that stuff. Like, that means I'm tough. I can't appear weak. I can't, all of these things that have narratives and tropes underneath all of them. So it is very situational, because I'm sure, certain cultures over others, like this is, a lot is on the line for that, it speaks a lot. And how do cultural norms and customs kind of inform these types of things that are acceptable, like dealing with pain at a level that can cost you long term, as opposed to something just competitive based. It's interesting because there is a lot of layers into those types of dichotomies and discourses.
And one of the things I find so interesting, in contrast to the athletes that Jordan's working with versus talking about professional MMA fighters, you can't remove the economics from it, right? So if Jordan's dealing with a collegiate athlete, it's a question of what responsibility does the athlete have to the larger team, to the college, and to themselves, right? Because they have certain goals that they want to accomplish in wrestling, or they want to make sure their team wins the meet, right? So there's that type of pressure. But if you're an MMA fighter and your corner throws in the towel because they're looking out for you, what if the UFC doesn't sign you again, right? What if you don't get another fight? That's a potential danger. If you quit, it looks bad. So we always say, all right, well, it's hard for the athlete to quit because all those cultural norms that Tanisha is talking about, because then they look soft. Then Dana White is going to talk about after how you didn't have the heart to keep going. And if you lose, but you get hurt more, maybe you get celebrated for that. So we understand all the reasons the athlete doesn't give up. And then we say, okay, well, their coach has to give up. The coach knows the economic pressure, and the coach might be relying on that win bonus. If the athlete wins, gets $30,000 more, that means something. Right. So where do we put the responsibility? And that's one of the things I always ask in class, because it's really easy as people outside to be like, someone has to stop the fight. But then the next question is, well, who has to stop the fight? And then what are the repercussions for that person? I mean, even we had cases, I guess thinking about Masvidal when he fought for the BMF belt, he fought against Nate Diaz. And think about how angry Joe Rogan as a commentator fell into this trap. How angry he was at the doctor for stopping the fight to protect Nate Diaz's eye from having permanent damage. And you have Joe Rogan saying, I think it was Joe Rogan commenting that fight, being like, that needs to go on. Nate Diaz would never give up. Yeah, we know Nate Diaz would never give up. We know his corner would never give up. So where do you put that responsibility? Maybe put it in hands of the doctor, but then the doctor gets criticized for not understanding how fighting is going to happen. And that fight took place in New York. So Joe Rogan was like, oh, that would never happen. Or maybe Dana White said that would never happen at a different place where they knew fights. New York is too soft, right? So everywhere it goes, so maybe it's about the institution or the specific business organization to stop fights, but we know they don't benefit from protecting the athlete. So it's really hard to figure out where do you put the responsibility and how do you make it safer for fighters? Maybe it's about rules so fighters don't get punished for giving up, right? Maybe we have to celebrate when fighters know that they're being hurt and know their own bodies rather than punishing them. But it's really challenging to figure out who has the power to make that decision.
You know, when I first was fighting in MMA, I could have sworn the rules disallowed, but I mean, I'm a million years old and it was a million years ago, disallowed corners stopping a lot of the fights. In certain states, corners were not allowed. And I'm on the fence about cornermen and coaches stopping fights. And my reasoning for that is when you're an up and coming fighter, you are the relationship between you and your coach or whatever you're trying to show to them that you're worth a shit, right? Pardon my language, but you're trying to show, I can take anything. I'm tough. I can fight through this. You know, you're proving something, not just to fans and stuff like that, but especially amateur level, you're proving to your coaches and your team or whoever, or, you know, if it's televised, you know, the audience that you can do it. You're worth it. You're worth this investment. Then later on and the economics, they're so important. Then later on, when there's money on the line, I mean, I have no statistics to back this up, but I would say that the amount of toughness in a fighter is inversely proportional to the paycheck that they make. That's a terrible thing to say, and I don't really mean that. I'm joking in a sense, but it's just like you become a little bit more diva-like when there's millions of dollars on the line. You know, it becomes way more about you than it is about being part of a team or proving that you're tough. And so I understand Rogan's upsetness at the doctor, but I do tend to think it is the doctors and the referees who are supposed to make sure the doctors are there to make sure it's safe. Like a fighter can continue, right? There's a medical opinion. Referees are supposed to make sure that the rules are being followed. I don't know. I am almost on the fence about corner people stopping fights. Now, I think in between rounds, I think it was Duke Rufus and one of the Pettis brothers, I don't remember which one, he broke his hands during the fight, and Rufus asked him if he could continue, and he said he didn't think he could. I think it's a terrible question to ask a fighter unless you're a referee, because then, and I'm not criticizing Duke Rufus for that at all. He knows his fighters. He has his own relationship with them. I'm just saying that, like, you're never going to answer your coach honestly. Well, most people aren't, because they want to show, you know, they can keep doing it. But psychologically, it's also a lot to put on a coach to know. A lot of them don't know, actually. I hate to say that, but if they've raised that fighter, they've known him from, you know, an amateur level, they've been with him for multiple fights, and they can see how tough, you know, they know what kind of damage they can withstand, then there's got to be an influence, an emotional influence on their decision making, which may not be the best thing for the economics of the fighter, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of talking in circles here, but I do tend to ramble. But I just think I understand it, and I understand stopping a fight, and I think that in between rounds, a coach should definitely weigh in on that. But I think that it should be a doctor asking a fighter if they can see or if they can feel. And again, no critique of Duke Rufus on that. Like that, he has his own relationship. But if any of my coaches would say, "Are you too hurt to continue?" I'd be like, "Fuck no, not too. I need to impress you, you know, because it's not just about beating the other person, or at least it wasn't for me. And there may be revealing a whole bunch of my psyche right there, but it's about making sure that they know I'm worth a damn, that I should be coached, I should be there, right? I belong there." Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? Am I allowed to ask questions, Nancy?
Yes. It's the round table.
Okay. I didn't want to deviate from the script.
No, there's no
So one of the things that I've been so fascinated in how strong this critique of fighters for giving up, no matter where the responsibility goes, fighters can still get blamed. So you see cases where after the fighter talks to the doctor and the doctor stops it, where you'll have someone, I think Daniel Cormier did this once, where he's like, "Oh, the fighter should have the fighter could have convinced the doctor they're okay if they wanted to go on. They were looking for the easy way out. So then the question becomes, right, where the pressure is still so much on the fighter. And were you ever in a situation where you were talking to a doctor or a coach where you wanted to, especially a doctor, where you wanted to communicate that you were struggling, but you also didn't want the audience or the commentators to know that you were communicating that you were struggling, right? Because you want the ref or doctor to stop it, but you're also like, I can't show that I want them to stop it.
Yes. Actually, I have an odd experience as both a coach of a fighter and as a fighter in the cage. But there was one fight where I had been winning. I dropped the other fighter, doing really great. And then I was an idiot and got taken down in the third round. And I was in a crucifix and being elbowed in the face. And my hair was caught in the fence because I had not, you got to get the right kind of hairstyle for some of those fences because they're not all regulation. And so my hair was caught in the fence. And so it was preventing me from posting and being able to move. And a crucifix is already hard enough to get out of, but you really need to be able to have all your posts at once. And I was getting just elbowed in the face over, it was great. She was really hitting hard, but she was alternating between elbows and punches. One of the things they say is don't make noises, right? You're not supposed to, and whimper, I think, is such a diminutive word, but you're not supposed to whimper, you're not supposed to, but at the same time, if you're getting hit in the face, you're trying to get out of something, your hair is getting pulled. I was grunting for sure, probably whimpering. And the ref started to walk over. My coach saw that I'd been down there for at least 30, 45 seconds, sustaining damage. And my coach was very savvy, and when he saw the ref coming over there, he said, "Oh my God, this is just like we practiced in the gym. She's going to wear herself out. This is perfect. Julie, you are in this position so many times this camp. This is perfect." Right. So the ref backs up, and that's gamesmanship from my coach. Right. I was pissed as hell at my coach because she got real mad, and the elbows were harder and faster and harder and faster and harder and faster. And it was like horrible. And I managed to get up. I managed to work my way up because she elbowed herself out. And I was, I got through there, but my hair's being pulled, and and then the fight ends, right? Clearly lost that round. Anybody would have scored that, I think, a 10-8 from the damage I sustained. But the gamesmanship that happened there, I was insanely grateful for. I don't have the best record in the world. A win is good. And I'd won the first 2 rounds. So, and we were in Albuquerque. So I was fighting at Albuquerque, things play in your favor. But yeah, it was a situation where it's like, if they'd have stopped that fight in that moment, I would have been totally fine with it. And actually, because my head was turned away, when my corner saw me, I turned toward them, and they saw this, like, it was, I don't know if it was like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Weili Zhang level. I mean, it was a big ass mouse on my face. I was really messed up from that fight. And I mean, that was head damage, right? So, but I don't know. I would always say early on in fights when I was working with my coach, don't you ever stop a fight. I can take it, but then I tapped all the time. So clearly I couldn't take it. I would stop the fight. So I had that experience before, and I came out on the winning end of it, mostly because I don't have brain damage at this point. Like I'm pretty lucky in that sense. As a coach, when I was coaching a kickboxing fighter, he was a brilliant fighter, and he's still fighting, but I don't want to do names on here because I don't work with him, and there's politics involved. But it was very early in his career, and he was in a kickboxing tournament, and he checked a kick, and it hurt his shin. And I mean, he was so good at checking kicks, I didn't notice it that much. And I was actually screaming at him to throw more leg kicks. He wins the fight. We get back to the locker room, and he says, I can't compete in the championship rounds. My leg hurts. I just prefer not to keep going. And to me, it was like, you're at an amateur level. You're getting ready to win this tournament. Are you out of your mind? Like, don't put ice on that shin, first of all. You don't want to get it iced up and numb. You want to kind of understand, in my mentality, you want to understand where the pain is coming from. You don't want your muscles to tighten up around it. You want to, that pain is useful in the sense that it will engage your other faculties and your other abilities to, he had a great boxing. He could have relied on that. But the thing is, by him saying that, it also showed me that whether or not he was seriously injured, and I didn't see x-rays, like I pulled him out of that. And the other coaches on the team were pretty upset with him too. But it also is like, if he said he wasn't going to continue mentally, he was checked out, right? It's it. You can't make somebody fight if they're not wanting to fight. And whether he'd convinced himself that was a true injury, or it was not a true injury, I don't know. You can't, as a coach, you can't, if you know they're not going to be able to fight because they're mentally thinking about an injury or pain, you've got to pull them out. Like, I don't know. That was a little rambling.
No, I have like 5 things that I want to talk about that you just brought up. That and you know, one of them being the age-old question: do you ice or not? Because now I hear ice is bad.
Please ask Gordon
Gordon.
or Dr. Feynman. I don't know. It was just my experience. I didn't want to ice.
Ice, heat, ice. What is the magical solution, by the way?
I mean, I still use ice. I have my athlete's ice still. I know that ice has kind of lost its luster in some circles.
Why is it? I just always thought that it takes down swelling.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It's just vasoconstriction, but it takes I mean, you have to actually ice for you to get the effects. So a lot of times I think when people ice, they just wrap it on their leg and walk on out, and like you're walking around with ice on your leg, you're still activating, you're still moving, you're not getting the full effect of it. I think their recommendation is to lay on a treatment table or somewhere with your leg or whatever body part elevated for, you know, with a compression wrap and ice, and it's for 20 minutes. I mean, and a lot of people just don't do that. So it does lose its effects there. I find it just good for anything that's acute. So if you're finishing up a practice of any sort, especially, you know, something where you're getting hit and you have kind of micro trauma to your body, it's good. It makes you feel good. And at the end of the day, it's sometimes even if you're not getting the full effect of it, I always talk about, you know, treating athletes, because everyone's a little different on how they handle things. Sometimes you just have to treat the 6 inches between the ears. That's, you know, just what needs to happen. So, and that's why I also don't ever count any type of modality or something that an athlete would want to use out, because, you know, if you sitting there and, you know, looking at your knee or putting something on it that you think is going to help it, you know, who am I to say that that's not going to give you at least a placebo effect? So that's something that I've always used, and that works with any type of athlete, whether it's a runner, a basketball player, anything. Sometimes you just need to make them feel good, and your whole treatment goal, your whole rehab goal is going to go a lot further than if you're like, no, you shouldn't be using this because of, you know, this scientific study of that. You know, it's sometimes you just need to treat the 6 inches between the ears. So.
I love it. So what we know now is it doesn't really matter ice versus heat versus you know, compression, as long as you think it's going to work and that you allow it to work. That's what I'm kind of getting. But
yeah, I mean, there's still things that do cause, you know, a physiological response, but sometimes you just need the psychological response too. So,
and I would just to jump in here, I think it's far better to listen to an athletic trainer than me on that subject. The mentality that we had, and I mean, you can even hear it. GSP versus Thiago Alves, famous quote from Greg Jackson in the corner is, you know, GSP says, I think I pulled my groin. And he did. He had pulled an upper groin, like more in the abdominal region. And Greg's like, I don't care, hit him with it. And that was kind of how we had this thing. If you break your hand, keep using that hand to punch people and it'll go numb. And so that, my perspective with my fighter was, I didn't want him to ice because I didn't want his leg I didn't want the muscles to tighten up. But also he was done fighting, so he should have iced, you know, like that you're done then. Like you can't, like, if you're mentally, it's the 6 inches between the ears. If you're not in a place to fight, you should not be fighting. That's how you get hurt badly. So
this is a great shift to kind of the mental pain involved in sports. And you know, I guess Jordan, with what you were talking about there, how often do you have athletes that aren't injured, but go the other way, where they say that I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that? Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty common too. You know, a lot of times if you just have an athlete that's really not bought in or not wanting to compete in any other sports, you can come into a training room, or you can come talk to an athletic trainer or even a doctor and say the right things that will get you pulled out of competition. And that's just kind of the reality of it, because it's kind of going back to how we were talking that, you know, putting the competing part and taking, you know, like the Carrie Strug example, where the athlete can kind of dictate that and control that, and you listen to them. It also is the same way when an athlete doesn't want to compete. They know if they come in and say, hey, you know, I got a wood in the head last practice, and I've just had this pounding headache since. They could not have a pounding headache, but I am not in their head, so I don't know that. So I definitely do see it. And it's something that, you know, you just have to listen to the athlete. It comes back to that. It's hard, but it's just the matter of fact. So,
And thank you, Kyle. Do you think combat sports, whereas in other sports, maybe soccer, tennis, it doesn't seem weak if you have a sprain on your wrist or something? Do you think that in combat sports you can never be vulnerable because of the toughness that Julie has described?
That's a very hard question. I would say, just thinking back to, I guess first I'll comment really quickly on Jordan's last response, because I think there's something interesting there, and then I'll try to answer that. One of the things that theorists who write about pain and talk about pain say is that pain is basically, it destroys language, and it's almost impossible to accurately capture with words. So we can use crude metaphors, we can point to where it hurts, but you can never really say how bad it is, which makes it really difficult. And you can think about when you go to a doctor's office and they give you that, you see that silly 1 through 10, and there are different smiley faces, right? Or frowny faces. Like, that's the best we've got sometimes. And going back to Jordan's last comment, how do you know if my 2 is different from Julie's 2, right? Maybe I just can't take pain, and Julie's really good at taking pain. Maybe if I want my coach to think that I'm hurt and give me attention, I'm going to say 7 when I actually feels more like a 4. And then how do they interpret 7 versus 4? We don't have anything. So it's one of the most powerful things about pain, but it's also the most challenging, right? Like, so how does Jordan really know what an athlete's experiencing? If they say they have pain in their quadricep, what does that mean? How do you find out how bad it is? So that's one of the things that makes it so difficult, communicating with a trainer, communicating with a doctor, communicating with the coach. And then in terms of this question of vulnerability, I think it depends. And we could go back to Julie talking about Duke Rufus and Anthony Pettis, right? It depends on the relationship you have with the coach. It depends on the culture in the gym. Is it a gym where people feel safe to describe, to say that they're hurting and they need a rest day? Or is it a gym where you get insulted and your masculinity gets questioned, right? Or you're thought of as too weak, and you're not going to move up the hierarchy anymore. If it's a gym based completely on the hierarchy and the people at the top get attention and the people at the bottom don't, well, that's probably going to create a situation where you don't feel very safe being vulnerable. If it's a gym that the culture is people acknowledge when they still feel kind of groggy because they sparred pretty hard the day before, and that you're not actually punished, but you think about the value of protecting your health, well, then it's going to be a different answer. So I have to say it depends on the culture of the gym, and that's true of all sports. If you're in a tennis team and you want to move up the ranks and you keep complaining about how you practice really hard and your legs are sore, or your shoulder or elbow are sore, well, the coach might judge you negatively, or it might be culture where they actually listen to the athlete. So again, that's one of those things. The coach has a ton of power in creating gym culture. The other thing I would say in terms of vulnerability is, in terms of acknowledging injury to the coach and being vulnerable in that sense and being seen as weak, that's really hard, right? But in terms of vulnerability among people who train together, I actually think the MMA gym is one of the places where I see the most vulnerability between people. Especially, it transcends gender, but especially with men. And I like to think of masculinity as being one of those things that often closes off the ability to show weakness, right? It closes off the ability to connect to other people. It's just a series of closures in society, right? To be a man is to be tough, to not show pain, not show weakness, not show emotion, all these different things, right? In the gym, you have people sharing a lot with each other, being willing to talk about things. And I'm hoping or guessing that Julie can back me up on this, but people who train together are willing to be vulnerable from an emotional perspective in ways that where people just aren't outside of the gym. And this is actually what drew me into doing this research. The very first day I was a grad student, I thought about doing this as a project. I wasn't sure. I went to an MMA gym. Very first day, I'm rolling on the ground with this dude who's like, I don't know, like 50 pounds heavier than me. I'm in my mid 20s. He's probably like 40 at the time. I don't know what I'm doing. He's just like choking me over and over. He's sweating. We're both sweating on each other. I'm out of breath. And we stop and he just starts telling me about how his marriage is falling apart and he doesn't know like what he's doing with his job, like why he's doing these things. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, I don't even remember your name. And suddenly we're sharing this thing. So in terms of vulnerability, like MMA is the place for vulnerability, but it's a very particular type of vulnerability. And that differs when, again, I keep going back to the other things we talked about. Tanisha brought up earlier, right? You have to think about the business and the culture around it. Vulnerability as a professional athlete is vulnerability as a training partner. Is different than vulnerability as a training partner. A lot of the people I study are doing this as a hobby. They're seeking it out for fun and the enjoyment. They don't have dreams of being in the UFC. They have dreams of eventually getting their purple belt, or they have dreams of maybe taking that one-off boxing match or that one Muay Thai fight, or maybe never doing that, right? So their relationship to pain is very different than the professional athlete or the people that Jordan is trying to expertly manage their careers. So maybe I answered what you're asking.
No, I think you did. And you brought up, I agree with everything that you said too. And it made me start to think about, I mean, it's what I teach in community psychology and like what makes a community and like organizations, right? It's something that you define within yourself, like for yourself, right? And how, there's obviously a lot of social identity and theory about that, where you gain esteem and senses of agency and well-being from being affiliated with something greater than yourself, right? From being in this collective. And each community, nothing's copy and paste. It has to be like very defined and custom norms, features, all of those things like for itself. The difference between CrossFit and yoga. Hell of a lot different ideas, right? But in CrossFit, you're like, push it. And yoga, it's like, okay, let's breathe. Like today, like your body is going to be different. But I do both. Well, I don't do CrossFit. But I'm saying like the difference, right? Like each one has a purpose. And the thing that I think is like really important that gets lost a lot of time, even in individuals and in communities, it's the sense that, I mean, we've been alluding to it and saying that it's up to the individual. But I think a really another important part of that is not everything is for everyone. We don't all have to do this shit, because it's like one of those things where like you're introducing someone to something that you're passionate about, like someone that has no idea, that has never known how to make a fist correctly, right? And you try and explain to them, okay, so this is mixed martial arts. Art, right? And then they're like, huh? Like it's trying to explain something that's in a language that few people share and are fluent in. Mm-hmm. Trying to translate that to somebody else. That's why it's fun for me to watch someone watch something for the first time that I already am immersed in, because then you're just like, oh my God, here it comes, right? Like I get off on that, right? But sometimes they'll either be like, oh my gosh, like that's super interesting, or ew. Not everything is for everyone. So when pain, if Julie's 10, right, is like my 5, that doesn't mean like I'm more badass than her. You know what I mean? Like those different rulers of metrics that we each have for ourselves. Like, okay, I know what is when I'm going too far, or I know when I can push myself. Like I told you, I started going to this Muay Thai gym, and now that I live in Vegas now, and it's like after a week, I was like, oh my God, this is a good community and that culture that Kyle was talking about, because I can tell, that levels are respected and that everyone is at a different place. You just come in and you fill out the stupid shit first. And it's like, you know, like, okay, are you here to just for self-defense purposes? You trying to tone? You trying to lose weight? Are you an amateur fighter? Are you a professional fighter? What's your level? Because your level will determine your ruler of how far is too far. And all of that is because not everything is for everyone. So we can't have, it's hard, which not, you know, I understand what Julie's talking about too, about cornermen and doctors and third parties to be this overarching force. It's hard to rely on that because if each state will have different requirements, are you kidding me? Like, then what are you saying about what each community defines for itself? You know, if New York can't get something together, but it's like, oh, well, we'll just go to Vegas. No, we'll just go to LA. They don't give a fuck. It's like, what is they and why don't they? That's because there's different terms and different customs and cultures and norms for everything. But it gets into this like, oh my God, no, they should stop the fight. Or, oh my God, he's bleeding. Clearly stop the fight. And it's like, if that's what you think fighting is, well then like, you know, don't ever, you know, it's one of those things.
I am so with you. But I want to bring up one possible counter, and maybe Jordan can bring this up, head trauma. Because that, I think we know, is something that not only is it, you know, because Jordan, can I ask this question? I want to know, and then when you get knocked out, is that a concussion? When you are like knocked enough that you are off your feet and land down, and then you've hit the canvas. Julie could probably answer this. So when you're knocked down, that's already a concussion. And just thinking about that and knowing, you know, that, you know, we talked about sometimes when a knee to a downed opponent happens, the doctor has come in and asked the fighter if they can fight. And I'm like, for me, I'm like, don't ask that person because either they're scrambled or they have to be a tough man. And they won't give the right, like they can't be answering that question. So I guess, all right, or Tanisha or George?
Sorry.
No. Tanisha, you go, then we'll hear.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, I was just going to say, like, for quick though, it's like, it's based on them. So if they want to die in the ring, it's not for everybody. Be a chess player. I don't know. Alex Smith had 17 leg surgeries in a year and a half from snapping his leg. He had the nerve to come back for a year and take that team to the playoffs. I was the one that was like, if his family must hate him, because I wouldn't let my husband come back after having zombie robot leg. But he came back, won player of the year, return of the year, whatever the fuck, and then retired, as he should have, in my opinion, right? But that is because he had the wiggly wobbly leg. He had 17 operations, but for him, he just wanted to know he could come back, and then he stopped like he should have, I think.
What was the robot part of his leg?
Huh?
I know the zombie part. What's the robot part of his leg?
They put all kind of like steel and stuff, like and dead people scanned it. So he was like zombie robot legs. Why he was able to like come back. But my point is like it's on him though.
Yes,
head concussions, same thing. It's like if you have it, that's on you. I'm not gonna do it.
Go to Jordan because I know I have student athletes and you guys have had them with concussion protocol now is deep. Like you can't, they are not supposed to look at screens. They're not supposed to. And I know this because I do think, yes, we clap when the football player is tackled and walks up, you know, and then gets back on the field. We clap at that. But I'm hoping that for me, the noggin, God, that's such a lame word, but I think we know about the science now that let that person, like we can go in and say, no, that person's had enough head trauma. If they don't even have the right to stay in. But anyway, well, Jordan, I want to know about you and like, because you know more about kind of the trauma involved with concussions.
Yeah. I mean, I guess is there like a specific thing you want to know, or is it just more of just kind of the overarching protocols and
I feel like in the last 10 years, we've learned so much more about the brain health and how repeated trauma is what happens. Yeah. We're going to talk about combat sports. We have to talk about how punch drunk used to be a normal status of the life of a fighter. And we just thought that was like, we didn't really understand the physiology behind it, but now we do. And
Yeah.
so I understand, Tanisha, you're right. Free will, that's what you want to do. But when can we maybe take out that, just because you can, you know what, a robot zombie leg is fine. You know, you can still won't have mental depression and all these things with that. But so Jordan, do you just have any thoughts on, is concussion protocol something that you see has increased, and has that been beneficial?
It definitely has increased, and even in the short amount of time that I've been a certified athletic trainer, I've seen changes from when I was a student to now. I think that the way that concussions are looked at and talked about is more serious. I think solely because people have realized that it's not just an in the moment thing, that there's a lot of things that happen down the line, which, you know, in football, it's been the hot button issue because, you know, of everything.
Yeah.
And I think that probably the adverse reaction to a lot of public and the UFC and MMA fighting and things of that nature is like, well, these football players have these helmets on and they're having all these issues later on in life. But I just watched someone get punched in the head repeatedly, and what's going to happen to them? So I think from the casual aspect, people are a little turned off or worried about that situation. So, but I do kind of agree. There is an aspect of a fighter should have the say, but there is still other concerns. You know, you don't want to have a second impact syndrome where you have a fighter die in the ring on live TV. That's not going to be great for the sport. But you know, I guess as a protocol standpoint, it's became very, very thorough. I guess you as a professor at AU probably received emails from academic support or from an athletic trainer themselves about one of your athletes getting a concussion, can't look at computer screens, don't know how they're handling that this year with everything being online. But, you know, we follow a kind of a strict return to play policy. We have, you know, some computerized testing that we do. We have balance testing that we do, where every athlete comes in and they have a baseline with us. So if they would ever have a head injury while they're competing for American, and this is at all schools too, not at American, but you know, we have they have to get back to that baseline. They have to be seen by a physician. They have to be asymptomatic, and then they start a gradual return to play progression, which is just light physical activity. So we're not just going to throw you back into your practicing when you get done, when you stop having symptoms and you get back to your baselines. So, and then you have to remain asymptomatic through all that to get fully returned to sports. So you're looking at an average, probably I'd say 14 to 21 days before an athlete is kind of feeling themselves again, is what a lot of them have said when they've had concussions. And I've been fortunate that I've had athletes get concussed, but none that have had, you know, drawn out symptoms that have kept them out for a long period of time. Whether that's the nature of working with the combat sport, where they're going to say, oh, I don't have a headache today, but they could have a pounding headache. And that's another issue with the whole process, is it comes back to it's very subjective. But from a medical standpoint, we try to do the best we can to recognize these things, because you can tell if an athlete is concussed. And I can't remember who brought it up, but you know, when a fighter gets down and you're asking them if they can keep fighting, and they're in this frenzy of they may have just lost consciousness, they may have their bell rung, and you're asking them, can you continue this? Of course they're going to say yes if they're just going to, you know, autopilot. And I think one thing that NCAA has changed with at least the sport of wrestling in my time working with it is when an athlete is concussed, or you want to do a concussion evaluation on them, you just do this to the ref and you take the athlete off the mat to a quiet room. And I've noticed that has changed things significantly, because I think it benefits an athlete to get out of that zone for a minute and be able to like take a deep breath, like, okay, I actually don't feel as bad as I do, or vice versa. I feel way worse than if I just would have sat on the mat for a minute and been like, I'm going to jump back in, and then have, more significant problems down the road. So I don't know if that's something you'll ever see in fighting, because it's been met with a lot of disdain to the wrestling community, because I think I remember the first year that it happened, and I was going over that with a coaching staff, and I said that, they're like, oh, people are just going to use this to their advantage. It's just rest time. It's just rest time. They're not hurt. I'm like, okay, well, there's benefits to it, but yeah. I hope that kind of answers the question.
Oh, you go, Julie.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things I find interesting about that, I actually completely agree with Tanisha in terms of fighting. If you decide to fight, then yeah, you may, I think you do that. But you're talking about student athletes who are actually in a university setting in an NC. And I think that the liability, I think it comes down to economics, right? Like the liability for a student to suffer multiple concussions and to possibly die or have visible, it's going to reflect on the university, it's going to reflect on the NCAA. And because universities make money off of student athletes, which I think student athletes should be paid, but that's another discussion. They want to make sure that the injuries, it's just more, I hate to say it's more professional, but it's more professional. Whereas when we see the UFC, we don't want knockouts not to happen in the UFC. Then it's not the UFC. Then it's not Bellator. Then it's not, Invicta. We want the knockouts and the excitement and everything, but the economics are such that there's nothing in place for fighters afterwards if there's residual damage from those knockouts. There's nothing, not that there is for the NCAA, but there is I don't know if there is, I can't weigh in on the economics of colleges or universities, except that they're getting a degree. And that is kind of they are getting some kind of benefit that the athlete is in performing, in doing things, and they're being protected in the sense that, the university is making money off of them. But in I'm just gonna say the UFC because it's, the big show in town. The fighters have no protections. They have nothing in place. They get to make those decisions, but if they make the decision not to continue fighting, yeah, they might get more fights down the line, or they might be called a big giant, I was gonna say something totally sexist, and I don't want to say that. I don't want to perpetuate that, but
that's exactly what they would get called. Like that's
yeah, and it's like, oh, he doesn't want to fight. He's not a warrior. The sense of the word warrior and all these other things. But I mean, I understand the mentality of wanting to go out and die on your shield, and it's a really important thing to instill in somebody as they are going to risk their body and all these other things, and there's nobody else in there with them. Although dying on your shield, the Spartans, I mean, it's a kind of a strange metaphor because the Spartans were a team. And they all had shields up, and that was the point. If you're coming dead on your shield, it means the entire thing is falling apart, right?
It wasn't working.
Yeah, but,
throwing it down. I love it.
When we see the fighters, getting knocked out and getting or stopping or not continuing, and people booing them or saying he could have continued, it's like, great, but when the residual damage happens down the line and they have to turn to possibly drugs, or they become violent or punch drunk or whatever it is after the fight career, and there's being snow imported to the UFC president's driveway so he can sled in the middle of Las Vegas, you got to think, like, the economics play such a big part in that. And I don't know, I do tend to bring in things from all sorts of, it all bombs in at once when I'm talking, but fighters need more protections. They need that kind of protection in place. I don't think you can go to a quiet room during a fight. That doesn't quite work. But I will say, and this is maybe a little bit off, when we're talking about pain scale or a 10 or anything like that, I have the least pain tolerance of anybody I've ever met. I cry over hangnails. Everything hurts me all the time. But you are fighting, you are achieving, and we talked about flow a little bit. You are, I hate to say liminal state because I know everybody in my MFA class would be mocking me relentlessly, but you are in a different state of mind when you're fighting. You're in a different place. And so the pain you feel in the gym and training or whatever, it's not something you always register right away, right? Yeah. You get yourself to the point where you work through it. They say you can't, I mean, and this is, again, I tend to regurgitate the lessons that I learned from the team I was on. They say you can't teach hard. Of course you can teach hard. You can always teach heart. You can always, teach somebody to take more pain. You can. The question is, and a lot of that has to do with ego and humility and what the people around them are doing and what examples are set for them. And, but the question is, do you want to teach that? I mean, yes, for a professional sport or combat sport or the military, where it is actual lives on the line. But if there's no protections in the end, if there's nothing economically that's going to really be assured, I don't know. I hate when fighters say I'm fighting to put food on the table for my kids, but it is so often the case. And so it's like, what do you do? That was my little tangent. Yeah.
No, I love it. Kyle, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, Julie actually brought up I was going to say, as a sociologist, I have to say you can't talk about it without the power, economics, and culture, which Julie was bringing up as well. And I was thinking specifically about the challenges for college athletes. So moving away from fighting, because we had Jordan's example, thinking about concussions at the college level. It's a challenge for football players, right? Because you now have this institution that provides support where when a player has a concussion, they have to be taken off the field, they have to be diagnosed, you have to go through the protocol. If your goal is to go pro, you don't want that on your record, right? When you go pro, you don't want it to say this quarterback or this linebacker has had 5 concussions or however many. I don't even know how many you can have in college before there's actually stricter protocol in place now. But that looks bad when a team is thinking about drafting you because they're thinking about you as an asset and they want to know how much damage you could take. So that's a negative, that's a red X next to your name, right? Where they're worried about that. So you can think about the pressure is to hide it, which again goes back to power, economics, and culture. You want to make money at the end. You're not in a situation where even if your coach is supportive, once you place yourself in that protocol, who knows what's going to happen? You might be the best player in the country. You're going to have millions and millions of dollars, and because you had a few concussions, you don't get drafted, and your whole plan disappears that quickly, right? And then I also think it's important to point out the sports that involve the most concussions. More and more, we see the kids growing up playing those sports are from a lower socioeconomic background, right? So you can't ignore that. Look at who the football players are, right? There's a pattern there. So when LeBron James says he loves football, but he's not going to have his kids play football, he's making a statement about this is what the sport actually is, and that's the dangers that go along with it. Fighting, I think, is shifting, where if we look at professional athletes, when I first started training, when Julie was competing, it seemed like people would come from all different backgrounds, right? There'd be like, not only just in the gym, but looking at professional fighters, it was a weird collection of people. Now, if you look at, and weird in the best way, right? Weird in a complimentary way. But now if you look at who our fighters are, it looks more like boxing, where it's more people coming up and saying, I came from this working class or poor background. I see this as a chance to make money. I got into fighting. Those are the people willing to go through the dangers of CTE to get to that point now. So the more professional MMA gets, I think the more we'll see that background.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because if I can jump in, because it's like the economic factor just cannot be stated enough how important that is, and the racial demographic and those components that you're talking about of like where these kids come from, and I mean bodies and race and the politics of that, and how masculinity, strength, performance, and all of that stuff are subsets of kind of cosmetic things that are observable, right? Seeing someone take punishment or getting whatever done to them. At that point, it's like, look, they're talking about that now with the NFL draft, right? Like that kid, Devontae Smith, is only like 5'0" and 166 pounds. They're like, oh, this kid is going to be fragile. Like they don't want to draft him, blah, 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 blah. But, his famous comment, like during the combine leading up, he was like, do you want a football player or a bodybuilder? Because I play football, And so it's a performative thing, but they're already looking at just the optics. Can he take this in the pros now? Is that, and how much of your body, you know what I mean? And so the economic stuff is huge. It's huge because if we know now that there is not a lot of wealth for fighters and that this isn't a moneymaker, why would you fucking do it? Every time we see somebody's face get grilled or a leg, the tweet that always comes up is, so you want to be a professional fighter? Well, you're doing it just for that or for something else about why you love pain and putting yourself through it. if the result is not transactional. And if it's not for financial gain, then why are you putting yourself through that? It's something mental. It's something that you need. And it's probably going to be different for everyone because of where we came from and why and what we're trying to prove to compensate for something else or to feel validated or just as a human. That's why they're saying for everybody. And so you almost kind of have to leave it up. But at some point, yes, especially when we're getting to pro levels, we have to have some type of third party board. But that's why we're doing that, right? Because each camp and teams and friends, will have different cultures that we talked about. But it's like, yeah, CTE, very fucking real, obviously. I mean, when I went to San Diego State and I was there, when Junior Seau killed himself and he purposely didn't shoot himself in the head because he wanted his brain examined. Something's wrong with me. Pro wrestlers, Chris Nowinski, Harvard grad, quit wrestling because of concussions and has been leading research in the charge in this, in all combat sports, period. I never saw the movie with the Will Smith, Dead to Truth. I never saw that one, but what that did for the NFL, that's when all of a sudden no one put those three letters together until that movie came out. And the NFL now we're talking about it. There's committees for this now because of the real shit that goes on. But yeah, the economic part of like from football and major professional sports where, yeah, you can be congillionaires, unions, player associations, that's what it's for. Combat sports, whole nother animal. And now money is a thing, and not because there's too much of it. It's because why would you do this? Why would you consistently consume this much pain when you know it ain't going to be, I'm thinking outside of the anomalies, right? The Rondas, the Connors, those obviously, right? The fighters, the prelim folks that we're talking about leading up to this last week, why would you do this? Why would you consume pain when you can't show off for it?
No.
That's mental.
That's very true. And I think that you bring this up, that it's just going to be another stake in the game that's going to kind of polarize who's actually going to do it. I hate to bring his name up, but Jake Paul, who I know, I'm sorry, I don't like to bring him into this conversation, but in his lead up to his fight, in his press, he said the quote, "I have early signs of CTE," which I think Jordan would tell us that is impossible at this stage because you can only see it, post mortem. And so there is no test. He's using it as this badge of, I've done all this work. I've done, I've been punched so much as so we're already seeing CTE as almost being like, he's using it.
It's being rebranded for something else. And it's total, and it's offensive as hell to anybody who has a family member who suffered from that shit. But that's why, consider the source. He's a dick.
Yeah.
But it shows that's why things like pain can be branded.
Yeah.
Things that are observable and those that aren't. Behaviorable things, branded. Weak is branded.
Yeah.
That's why there's taglines like, you can't hang or not.
Yeah.
It's like there's shit. These things, emotions are branded. And what do we want things? Nike, just do it. It doesn't say ... but unless it doesn't hurt. They don't care. Just do it. It hurts. Just do it.
Yeah.
Things are branded. And, I don't know if it'd be a longer conversation if things we would say like for good or bad or whatever, but emotion is branded. Things like concepts like this are branded. And it speaks to the culture of each and every different things. Each one has its own discourse, its own language, its own thing, right? And so it's not copy and paste. And it's unfortunate because the way, it's cultural, even the way like Mexican boxers, right? Yeah, they have this certain style, you know what I mean? And Irish boxers and fighters and, the Nurmagomedovs and stuff. This is the way they fight. Like this, they each have their own particular flavor, right? And you can't define them the same way.
No.
But it's like who's in charge of it's probably the people who create these like hashtags like Happy Rainbow Day. Like whoever's on that committee is probably the same one that's like, okay, this is how we'll define pain universally and fight and make it apply to all forms of physicality and activity. Bullshit.
No, and I have to say, for the bright side of MMA, especially versus boxing, and then you brought up football, Jordan, where we have padding, we have studies that show that that's much more dangerous for head trauma because you're not seeing the damage. Whereas in MMA, you know, I think fights are quicker and you also have submissions. And they do have a great system of suspension in the UFC. Like I think if you have a head concussion, contusion, I don't know, it's maybe even 6 months. I know they have different levels. So you're only fighting maybe once or twice or 3 times a year. Now, economically, Julie.
And people get
poor, right? Yeah. You know, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Kyle?
no, you go and then I'll say.
Well, I was actually I'm not saying this as a counter because Tanisha's completely right. But there is, on the other hand, having gotten through this, you know, writing this essay and watching, not Nami Yunus, watching Weili Zhang or Zhang Weili fight Joanna Jędrzejczyk over and over and over again. Yeah, it's branded, but it also, there is something when you're fighting, there's a reason you do fight, and it may be, I think it is pitched as an economic, like a way to get out of economic hardship or what you can say, but there is something, it's not even transcendence. There's something that happens when we see a good fight, right? Of course, people make a lot of money off of that, but that's still a real human feeling. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of participation. There's something is happening. Something happens to fighters when they're fighting, which is why they keep doing it, which is why it is so goddamn hard to retire. And people come back all the time because they want a taste of whatever that was that made them. I keep bringing up examples from people I don't want to bring examples from, but like, you know, something one of my coach used to say, that's why people went into space. Like, that's why people are astronauts. That's why they try to settle new worlds and stuff like that. It's not, I mean, settling new worlds, colonialism is never ethical. It's not an ethical thing, but it's a drive. It's something that makes you want to do something more. When I was a competitive karate fighter, I remember I had my nose broken and I would go and I would push it all the time. And I'm not, I have a very low pain tolerance, but I wanted to know that I could feel it and I could keep going and I could keep going. I would hit myself in the legs with sticks to condition my shins and my thighs, not because I liked the feeling, but I wanted to know how much more I could take, because if I could take it here, I can keep going. I have the ability to do this. I have the ability to cross whatever threshold this is. I don't know that I got high off of those experiences. Again, I realize I'm veering into psychological territory here that could be problematic, and I don't want to lessen the trauma people may feel. Like we talked about cutting at one point. It wasn't today, but you know, there's certain methodologies that people do to not cope with emotional problems, or to cope with emotional problems by feeling something physically, right? To get into a different state of mind. And there is a different state of mind that happens with fighting. And I don't know that it's seeking pain and punishment so much as seeking, and again, this is just all I know is fighting. I don't know other athletics, but it's seeking excellence. It's seeking something beyond yourself. And the way it's billed as entertainment does make that really difficult, right? Because we should experience these things. We should experience the tremendous heart of Carrie Strug, and to see that somebody's able to do that. You know, but at the same time, and we shouldn't, I don't know where I'm going with this, except that like it shouldn't be
Celebrated.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think he celebrated.
It's
Maybe celebrated in the wrong way, or maybe it's the way it's pitched.
Well, I think
that you're less than a person. Sorry, go ahead. I'll stop interrupting you guys.
Oh no. I building off what you were saying, and I guess quick response to Nancy. I think there's something that's true about MMA based on the way that it works, the way the competition works, being less traumatic to the brain than something like boxing or football. But I think we fall into the trap a little bit of repeating the promoter Dana White's language about it being safer, because if you want to be good at MMA, you're going to train boxing. And so even in the fight, you're going to be doing a lot of rounds of just pure boxing. You're going to be getting in the head. And it's a training that's true of football, true of boxing, true of Muay Thai, true of MMA. It's a training where you get all the damage, right? You get hit head over and over as you get good at that thing. And then it's great that athletic commissions have those suspensions, but people figure out ways to get around it. So one of the guys I trained with, he would get suspended in Minnesota, and so he would go and compete in Wisconsin, right? Like there's no communication once you cross that border. And as Julie knows, the way amateur organizations, or not amateur, smaller organizations are run, like you can do anything, right? There's ways to get around this stuff. But in terms of what Julie's saying, it's what I find so fascinating. It's one of those challenges of the difference of the experience of the spectator versus the participant. So there is something about watching that violence, that brutality, and how do we respond to seeing that painful act when someone's bleeding, when Joanna has her head like swollen 2 times the normal size. So there's that experience that we could talk about. There's the part that we can be critical of, which is how the UFC commodifies it and sells it. And what Tanisha's saying, it's all about branding, right? Like then we can think about the positive negatives. But there is something that we don't want to completely dismiss in talking about the branding of the experience. And that's what you're getting at, right? There's something really powerful about sharing that painful moment, whether it's pushing yourself as a climber and just seeing how like reaching that level that you didn't think you could reach. But in MMA, sharing that painful moment with something else, which is what I'm so fascinated about. It is psychological, but it's also social, because like there is that bond that's formed really, really quickly that doesn't happen through sharing other things. If I don't know, if I share something positive with Tanisha that's not painful, it would still be a happy moment we share. But when you push yourself through something together where you're each like encountering a level you didn't know you could achieve, especially if it's the other person pushing you there, there's a reason people hug right after. Sometimes when they fight, sometimes when they train. There is something powerful that occurs. And then the question is what we do with that. So I don't think it's wrong to be celebratory of that. I guess the one critique that I often end up in my research is it's a little depressing that a lot of men in the MMA gym can only find that level of openness after punching each other in the face, right? Like after you punched me in the nose and bleeding, then I'm willing to hug you and talk about sad things in my life, but I need you to punch me in the nose first. Like there's something depressing about that, but that doesn't mean there's not something powerful and exciting that happens in that exchange.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I remember I was watching the fight, the other day with a casual layman friend or fan that like a friend of mine that I'm like, who loves watching me watch it. And so like, she's kind of learning by,
I keep imagining that you're talking about your dog when you talk about that casual fan who likes watching.
He was a lightweight this past Saturday. Like he did not watch at all. He was actually eating the boxing gloves you gave him. But so my friend was watching with me, and when they hugged after, she was like, oh my God, they do that? She was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Yay. Like she started to respect the sport more. And that, as for her now is a touch point, like a branding touch point of like, for her, like how she's going to remember that sport. And then a couple fights later, like someone was still talking like after the round ended and she was like, oh, they talking shit. Okay. So she's seeing the dichotomy, like both sides of that stuff, and as entertainment, it's like, absolutely. Like that stuff, I think, yeah, it can be appreciated and should, and kind of celebrated in that way, because that's looking at the respect of the art form and the performance and pushing two people to a competitive level. Consent, all that stuff's great. I think too, Julie said something that was really, really important that it made me think of. It was in that Mark Maron book, how I first heard of it, like The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He mentioned this philosopher who wrote a book called The Denial of Death. And in it, he was talking about, there's two, it was an anthropologist and a sociologist, I think. And he was talking about, like, obviously there's two forms of self, right? So you have your physical self, the one that like poops, pees, bleeds, like all of that stuff. And then you have your symbolic self. Now that's your identity. That's who you stand for. The values, the things that color you in, right? And people go through, he said, the problem is people are so afraid of death and of being forgotten that they'll take on these giant, what he calls immortality projects, so that their identity, symbolic self lives on. Why sometimes people name their son after them, a junior, to keep my name alive, why we go into wars, what we do to get streets named after us, or monuments, these large projects to make sure, and monuments of ourselves and pushing ourselves through pain and fighting, or playing years beyond your past just so that you can ring chase and to do all these things. Like we do these huge immortality projects so that our symbolic self lives on, the things that we want, right? And I thought about that, but because it's kind of ego driven now at that point. So that's why it's so specific and like different for everyone, because one person might be that type of, an ego driven thing where it's more of, no, I have to win. I have to push myself. I'm not going to, tell them that I'm really, really hurt and like all those things, because they are trying to fulfill something emotionally. And so they go through these crazy things that to anybody else, but oh my God, I could never do that, but it is completely, it's based on what you were looking to fulfill. That is personal, and yeah, the entertainment part it's huge. It's everything, especially when it becomes economic, and if we're looking at it from that professional level, as opposed to the spectator, right? And celebrating it like gladiator style, like kill him, all this stuff. It's that stuff. It's when it's not forced upon you, it's hard. I mean, I remember watching the pay-per-view. I think it was like a Survivor Series or something in the 90s when Owen Hart died in the ring live on pay-per-view. I still have it on VHS, and it's insane, but like remembering those things, and then like the culture of, and pro wrestling is a whole nother topic about like, oh, well, it doesn't hurt, right? And then like you see bruises and all that shit, and it's like, oh, well, it's fake, it's not real, right? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so you don't even feel pain? Like, sure, it's a predetermined script. We all know that. But half the time, the people that are the first to tell me like, oh, well, pro wrestling, it's fake, right? Like they're wearing a Harry Potter shirt. And I'm like, oh, we're going to talk about what's fake. And you literally have like a Spider-Man case on your phone. Who gave you that? But it's what, like, did you meet him on Venice Beach? Was he nice? He looks short. But it's one of those things that it's so up to the person, and it's so cultural, and it's so the finance part of it, especially at the professional level. Like, why would you go through this, to if it's not going to, give your family comfort for years, generations.
Thank you. I completely agree. And I want to touch upon, like, maybe we could end here, because we're getting to the emotional experience, which I think is so interesting. You brought that up, Julie, because then you've experienced it. You've experienced the thrill. I'm telling you guys, I'm not going to be a fighter. I'm not going to do that late stage midlife crisis, but I can't imagine using my body in a space in front of friends, family, the world, and besting them, knowing that I am more powerful, and that achievement has got to be like, and I'm thinking of the adrenaline, endorphins, unbelievable. And I would definitely wonder, like, how can I ever get that back? And something like that. I also think it's interesting, though, I get it by watching, because I think I kind of cheat into how my students get into my class, because on my syllabus, I have them watch Thrill in Manila, which is Frazier versus Ali. They watch that. I have them watch the 9th round of Ward versus Gotti. And I'm realizing those are showing people pushing past their limits when they're obviously in pain. And so my students become, they're entranced. And I'm like realizing that I'm showing them like this intoxicating human emotion. And I'm not cheating, but I'm just saying, like, I show it to them, and like all of a sudden my students love combat sports. So yes, I think that we got to understand too, that the spectator's role in this too, that we are gathering something in this. And it wouldn't be the same if we're watching point fighting, and that's sometimes why, I'll be honest, sometimes boxing matches, I'll be like, it doesn't look like this is going to go anywhere. Click the channel. Does anyone have thoughts on that about, the immersive experience of pain with the spectator? Julie.
I always have thoughts. I think what it becomes really interesting is where that intersects with branding, in the sense that we're always looking for how to be a person. We're always looking, and we can, and like how to be a man, how to be a woman, how to, I'm that's binary categorization on my part. And I don't mean that, but I'm making fun of those kinds of manly men, that I'm making fun of it, because the truth is, as human beings, we're always looking for guidance. even the most independent minded, I do my own thing, you learn to say I do my own thing from watching other people say I do my own thing. We're always, you know, we attach things like tribal and this and that, but I mean, even I'm actually thinking of collegiate sports and the rule sets that are involved and how people, you know, achieve greatness within rule sets because they're told how to be good, how to be great within this, and they're able to accomplish that. And breaking records means that you're doing something new based on something that's been established, right? And I think that to witness that kind of greatness, you're witnessing people telling you a way to be great, or it's always going to be a narrative, it's always going to be a story, right? And one of the reasons I think I got as far as I did in fighting was because I loved the stories. I loved being told stories. I loved the stories of greatness. And I loved thinking I could be a part of that story when in fact everybody is creating their own damn story. We're not proof rock, you know, we're all the ones, we're getting there. Like people are trying to, well, actually we are all proof rock in a sense, but we're trying to find our stories, and watching these things physically enacted in front of us, it gives us a way to be. It teaches us how to be a person in a sense, or how to push through things. The problem is when the brand is attached to it, it's just like, do you want to be a fucking fighter? Do you want to? And it's just like, there is no one way to be a fighter. There is no one way to be great. There's a lot of ways not to be great. You know, there's a lot of ways to really wreak havoc on humanity. And I think when we get stuck on the labeling of how to be a certain way, or how to be a man, and I don't, or how to be, you know, this, then you're not really understanding that we're all trying to learn how to be a person. Till the day we die, we're trying to learn how to be a person. And something is sated in us emotionally. Something is fed emotionally when we see greatness, when we see that beautiful fight, when we see that Carrie Strug landing. I don't know why I keep coming back to that. It's just totally in my mind now when I'm thinking about pain. And I think pain, everybody feels pain. At some point in your life, you feel pain. You have to, I guess there's some medical conditions where you don't, but I have no familiarity with that, so I'm going to ignore it at the moment. Everybody feels pain. And so everybody has a point in their life where they know they need to push beyond something mentally, physically, emotionally, and just have examples of that and narratives of that where you feel like you relate. That's what it stands for. Branding it and making it a consumer product, that gets dangerous. That's where it, you know, that's where I think the placing value on it makes it lose human value. You know? So that's my shtick. Yeah.
Well said.
I feel like I'll try to give a very short response. Although I do feel like a whole paper could now be the research project on how people covered Carrie Strug. Now that's what I'm interested in, because my memory of that event, after she lands it, right, you focus on the ankle, but then there are all the images of the coach picking her up and carrying her off while she's crying. So then my question is, did the branding focus on her toughness as an athlete, or is it about immediately the relationship between the coach and the young girl? Because suddenly she's like this young girl suffering versus a tough athlete. Like there's a whole thing there. So now I just want to talk about Carrie Strug also. But outside of Carrie Strug, I guess the question we have to ask is focusing on the spectator side. I don't, this isn't an area to do research on, but just thinking about pain, right? Because I'm very focused on how pain transcends the self to some degree. It forces you to the self, but it also destroys the self, right? Like when you're experiencing that painful moment, the world collapses around. All you can think about is, what is this thing causing pain to my elbow or my shin or my nose? Like and that's, there's something very powerful there, for lack of a better word, right? You're not thinking about all those other things. You're not thinking about how your taxes are due in a month, or those papers you have to grade because of that painful moment. And then as the world returns, then you're encountering the person causing that pain to you. So there is something both that is very human about it. It reduces you to a body. But what does it mean to watch that moment instead? So when we watch two fighters experiencing that, we could, from a more romantic point of view, being like, well, we're seeing something human. We're seeing something powerful, and that reminds us of what people can do. It can point to greatness. It can do all those things. And Nancy studies all the amazing literature that talks about all the beautiful things. I've got a cat crossing. Nancy studies all the amazing literature that captures those moments. That's why people That's why people like to write about fighting. There's something powerful that you can do. It can capture something human. But then if you go to a bar and watch a fight and it's a bunch of people yelling and cheering for the person to be knocked out, and they're just like bored during every other part and they're just like, knock them out. That beautiful discussion of like encountering someone in their most vulnerable moment and all those things, like that kind of disappears pretty fast. So there is something about watching that violent, that painful moment that we can celebrate, but there's also something pretty brutal and gross about it. And it's always that's what's so fascinating about MMA. It's some of the most transcendent, beautiful things, and it's something about human nature and something about seeking out community. We can talk about all those things. We can also talk about cheering and spilling your beer when someone gets knocked out, right? Like, what does that mean to encounter someone having that concussive damage, about watching Chris Weidman break his leg and eating your chicken wing? I don't know. Like, there's something there too. So what does it mean to encounter the pain of another person? So I guess I'll end at that point.
No, I think that we're talking about balance, because we started this with, there's good pain that creates muscle, that strengthens it. You need it. And I think, that's the good soreness, and that's going to, and then, we're talking about like damage and, other things. But I think there's a balance in how.
But 99% of the pain in MMA is not the good pain, right? Like if you go and train in MMA after time off, everything hurts, and not in a good way. Like it hurts to rub your skin against the ground, right? It hurts when someone puts pressure on your body, and it's not good in the way of building something physical, but there's all that in-between space and pain that we still seek out, but we can't justify it by saying, this is building my explosive movement tomorrow.
I mean,
right? So
it's true, but yeah, it's hard. It's weird too, and I guess there's levels, and that's why people define it differently for themselves. Like for me, sometimes, like if I'm training and doing deadlifts, and the next day, if it doesn't hurt getting out of bed or going upstairs, I'm like, man, I could have put another plate on. So it's like I define my performance in the gym by my soreness, by my pain, and I'm like, okay, I feel that I'm sore. This hurts. This is a good hurt. But I know that difference between like, okay, maybe I should wear my brace next time or whatever, or try to shoot. Like I kind of, but that's, and I'm not competitive in anything like that. That's just for me training personally, and like why I'm putting myself like through pain. It hurts still, but it helps me know when I've gone too far or when I can keep pushing myself. That's, but yeah, I was right about all of it.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that we got to so much. We didn't get to pain management, and in terms of, so we're gonna have to do this some other time. Kyle and Tanish, when you get your next publication, or we'll just have it again, because I was really interested also in narcotics. I had my students watch the fighting machine. Am I saying that?
Smashing Machine.
Smashing Machine. I'm like, that's not right. Yeah, Smashing Machine. And so that's really interesting, because that's part of it, is that when you have these serious injuries and you have to have surgery, you're going to have to take those kind of levels. And, something like opiates, those are the endorphins that you get when you are released, when you go through pain and stuff like that. And then, we get into other complications of addiction. And so there's so much more that, but I'm so glad we were able to talk about this, because, and I'd love if anyone else has any last things they want to say. Jordan, do you have anything to add?
I mean, it's been interesting hearing all your guys' perspectives. And obviously I'm a little outside of this realm, but I think with the spectator aspect of everything, it kind of just comes down to the way I've always looked at most sports. People like to relate, and when someone's doing something that you physically can't do, or you feel like you're incapable of, and you watch someone do it, there's something exciting about that. And then, I mean, I think at their core, all humans kind of enjoy violence. They like seeing the fighting. They like being like, wow, that person's imposing their will over the other person, and I don't think I could ever do that, but it's kind of cool to watch someone do it and see all the time that they put into it. So, yeah.
No, and I thank you all, because the emotional pain of that you experience, of you've done something really great and you you're not doing it anymore, or when you lose, that's got to be the worst. That's got to be like, you know, you just take the opposite of feeling like king of the world. So thank you guys for going through this, and that, I think we know that this just needs to have further conversations. So Jordan, do you have any like website or Twitter or anything where people can learn more about you?
I have Twitter. To be honest, I don't tweet a lot. I don't even use it much, but I don't even know what my handle is.
No, don't worry. I think I put it on.
Sorry. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty low key on social media.
You really brought, thank you for kind of bringing in the biology and the physiology to this conversation.
Yeah.
Tanisha, any last words? Where can people find you?
I always have too many words. I put most of them on my Twitter account, at T Singleton Says. My website, TanishaSingleton.com. You can find some of the reports that I've written in other episodes of Writing and Fighting, and other places where I've done some speaking, there on the website.
And Black Girl Hockey?
Black Girl Hockey Club, yeah, at Black Girl Hockey, on Twitter as well. Go to blackgirlhockeyclub.org, nonprofit organization working to make hockey more welcoming and inclusive for Black women and the folks who love us. A lot of work to get done on that, so thank you for plugging that too.
Oh, I love it. All right, Kyle.
Let's see. On Twitter, it's Kyle the Green. And I need to update my website, but if you go to Google Scholar and search my name, you can see the articles I've published on mixed martial arts and sports and politics and the NBA. So yeah, feel free to check that out. And if you read an article of mine, if you're someone who is a professor and you assign it, I'm always happy to talk to a class. If you have questions just in general and you're curious, just email me or send me a message on Twitter. I'm always happy to respond. And so it's exciting to talk about research that I'm doing. So.
Oh, thank you. No, I love that this all came out of your article that my students really delved into. Julie, we know we're going to watch Invicta in May. And tell us,
May 21st, there's an event. I know it's going to be held in Kansas. I don't know all the programming details. I'm so sorry. I'm waiting to be filled in on a lot of things, but it'll be me and TJ again, and it's going to be great. There's an atomweight title fight. I think also a flyweight title fight too, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. Yeah, I've not turned off my Twitter account, but I've locked it so I can put in another round of job applications. Don't want the employers seeing some of the things that I say just yet. There's their perspective on me. But I actually would like to take a second to plug something completely unrelated. My sister has an article in Scientific America, and she's on the cover, and it's absolutely beautiful artwork that she hired an indigenous artist to do. And now I'm complete, even though I wrote it down, I don't know where my notes are. I'll tweet it if you follow me. If you don't follow me, I'll tweet it but anyway, it's beautiful. It's a cover of Scientific America, and it's about the early, basically, she's got a book coming out too, and I'm helping do minor edits. I'm not a scientist, but it's incredible. My sister is amazing, and I couldn't be prouder of her and kind of this moment for her. What's not a lot to do with fighting, but yeah.
What's her name again?
I'm sorry? Jennifer Raff. Her name's Jennifer Raff. Yeah.
Guys, Google that.
Yeah, she's the early peopling of the Americas. It's about her book and just the theories and stuff, and it's not. I mean, she's an academic, but it's not a wholly academic text. It's accessible.
Yes, very accessible. Oh, that's up my alley. I'm a big nerd, and I'm Nancy Kidder, and I teach writing and fighting at American University. And thank you guys for joining me on this conversation. We explore literature and combat sports. And we overthink, and I appreciate that you did it with me this afternoon. We have some upcoming panels down the line, so stay tuned. Bye. Thank you so much.